So soldiers didn't give us our rights. You might be thinking, Ray, why are you making this video? Or you might be thinking, you idiot, why are you making this video? Of course they did. I'm making this video for the latter half, but we're going to do a little rundown of what rights are and where they come from and why we have them. And I'm going to try to be very hard about not ripping on soldiers, because this statement does come from a place of well-meaning respect. Possibly, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Maybe. The statement definitely comes from a place of nationalism, and you have your rights because we gave them to you. But there's problems with that, right? Right? Progress is not made by those in power. You might be throwing up some objections, but people in power, by default, by their point of view, by reasoning of them being in power, think that things are fine because they are in power. The King of England was like, oh, those colonials, they don't need more rights. I mean, I'm sitting here in the throne and I'm a pretty good guy and I can do anything I want. This seems like the right number of rights. Nobles that think so too? Yeah, they don't need any more rights. We tax them. We take care of that. I fought with people that talked about how the Revolutionary War was unnecessary. Not really fought. More been shocked while they spout rhetoric at me, which is how a lot of my arguments go with people. A lot of people. But what makes progress go forward in reality is people putting pressure on those in power. So my research is going to be incomplete, because when you put president in a search engine, you get the current president and not a historical presidential quote. Maybe someone talks too much in power. But there was a president that got elected to office, and he said, I'm elected to office, and I will gladly make this progress happen, but you have to make me. He wasn't saying that he abandoned the cause. He was saying that it is the pressure of the public that makes progress possible. One politician isn't going to change anything. It's the movement of people in order to save their rights, change things, stop going to war. It's the movement that is the power, and it is the elected official under that pressure, if they like it or not, that makes it go forward. Donald Trump's been clamoring for a wall for a while, but there's a lot of people clamoring about how they're heartless monsters who are separating families. That's a lot of pressure on politicians. Same thing with stopping Obamacare. When they tried to thwart it, which they did in several parts, but they couldn't do it nearly as fast as they wanted to because of the public pressure. Because when they went to their senates, people lined up to ask them questions. Rod Bloom, my douchebag, Rod Bloom, he walked out of an interview because of a question. He had his staff filtering out people to try to make sure that he didn't get people that would ask him tough questions about Medicare. And he still got people in there that were like, no, get this question answered. Make him answer for the things he's doing. And because of that, a lot of Obamacare is still functioning and still there. There's not a way to pay for it anymore because they didn't need approval for that. And so what little bit Obamacare paid for itself, it doesn't do that anymore, so we're just going to run a deficit on it. Thanks. In the 2016 elections, I knew no matter who won that I would be protesting. And that is how I think everyone should feel, because that's how rights work and that's how things happen. If Bernie Sanders won, I would be out protesting for the things that Bernie Sanders campaigned on, because those are the things I want. If Hillary Clinton was elected, I would be out protesting for the things that Bernie Sanders ran on, because I want those things to happen. And now that Donald Trump is president, I'm still protesting for those issues, but I'm also protesting against the things that he is doing, except for making peace. I want peace to be made. Ray, I thought you were going to talk about soldiers and politics, not politics. Well, okay. So soldiers are controlled by the people in power. Soldiers are tools of those in power. They are a force that the government exercises, like the police or taxes. Soldiers are not known for thinking. Generals and strategists are known for thinking and telling the soldiers where to go. Soldiers are known for following orders and shooting people. That is what they do. Yes, they can build bridges and stuff, and yes, they can be peacekeepers, but they're peacekeepers by standing around and having the threat of violence. Just soldiers are violence. Soldiers are an implicit threat, saying, hey, what about the revolutionary soldiers? Alexander Hamilton riding into battle. He's gonna take his shot. I'd say that the Revolutionary Armies is set up much differently than our army is today. The revolutionary forces were largely militia, and they started out as protesters. It was a protest to begin with, just to have a say over, taxes. And then, because of the application of force, they started a revolution and started themselves to be soldiers and fighting and arming themselves with the threat of violence. It was a protest that a lot of colonial Americans wanted, but then a lot of them also didn't want. And actually there's a mass exodus of people after the United States of America is established, of people going to Canada so they can stay under English rule. Glossed over a little, but there's probably quite a few Americans who fought for the English in the Revolutionary War. Alright, so now let's get to the idealistic part, the part about what are rights then? In our Constitution, we describe our rights several ways: God-given, self-evident, and inalienable. These things mean that they come from a higher power, or even ourselves. They're kind of vague with some of the higher power stuff, but what they're trying to say is they're things that a man or a king cannot say that we don't have or deny us. They want to say that no earthly power can take away these rights of men, and that is a reason to fight. So in this sense, nobody gave us our rights, other than God. Nobody gave it to us. They were already ours. They're ours for realizing. And what protesters are, what the Revolutionary War did, was fight to have those rights realized. They said, we have the right to govern where we live. We have the right to have a say in the laws that are over us. We have a right to life. We have a right to free speech. We have a right to pursue happiness. We have a right to have as many or as few children as we want. That is the core of the American Revolution. We have the right not to let a soldier live in our home. That kind of whirls back around to what I was saying about soldiers, where soldiers are an implicit threat. If a soldier is staying in a home, those people cannot do revolutionary activities. Those people have to give their food to this soldier. They have to pretend to be nice to him. They lose their privacy to him. And because of that boundary being crossed, the privacy being taken away from several people, that boosted a lot more people's support for the revolution. And also boosted a lot more people's support for the government, including that in our Bill of Rights, that we don't have to board soldiers in our home. So how does this function? Is you have all the rights that you're going to already have, and all of the future rights that people possibly recognize. You have them in you already. It's just a matter of recognizing them. The other myth or stereotype that I want to push back is that the women's right to vote, the suffragette movement. Women's suffrage was only accomplished when men voted to give women the right. No. By definition, they are people. They have the right to life. They have the right to a say in the government where they live. And functionally, it's that way too. It was because of the protest, because of the outrage, because of the lengths that the women went through, and how soldiers and police and prisons treated them, throwing them in jail, no matter how much anti-suffrage propaganda went out, giving them long faces and weird noses and making them ugly. It still eventually worked, because the fact is that there were women starving in prisons because they couldn't vote, which was their right by birth. By my framework, they have a right to have a say in the government they participate in, and they wanted that right extended to voting. They said voting is part of how we get this stuff going, not just us talking to our husbands or writing senator letters or having a senator's mother scold you. Those are all influences over the government, but not as big a deal as voting. And I think this has really put up the difference. Like, it's a perfect illustration of what I'm trying to say. What I really want people to take away from this video is voting is an important say in how we run our government, but is not the only say. And it is very important. Voting is important, but also the other ways that we influence the government is fantastically important. Important. Protests earned us recognition for our rights. Another myth that comes up that I would like to debunk is the thought that women being in the workforce is what earned them their rights. Earned their rights. Like, I still have a problem with that part of the statement. But also the thought that because women were useful in factories and sewing and production and capitalism, that they were then allowed to vote because they're useful members of society that way. I don't know if you have a job, but usually after an 8-hour day of any kind of labor and applying myself for a problem, I don't feel like researching, reading news into politics and how we should run the country. I feel like I need more free time for that. Another way I've seen this framed is women being useful in factories meant that the economy could keep going without men, so that more men could go to the battlefield. So women could put forth war effort, which is what earned them the right to vote. Which is something that I believed for a long time because I was told it by a history teacher. But it doesn't make sense, like, if you think about it. Like, first of all, women got the right to vote just before World War. Women got the right to vote in 1918? 1917? It wasn't really a big deal that women were in the workforce, and there wasn't really that big push for it until World War II, where they had to, like, make planes and shellings, and nylon had to be made into parachutes. That's when women really stepped into the workforce. And really, in the early 1900s, in the Industrial Revolution, the big thing that you might remember if you're not trying to look through in rose-tinted glasses is child labor. There was a lot of child labor. Like, we didn't have teenagers. Children in the city worked in the factories. By that logic, in the early 1900s, children should have been able to vote because they were a huge part of our economy and making industry run. Their little hands could reach into things, you know, fantastic pictures. Oh. But to blow a bigger hole in it, you know, the people that are always ignored when it comes to these kind of conversations and views on history? Black people. You know who was always in our workforce? Black people. And you know who took the longest to vote? They were black soldiers in the Civil War. There was never a time where there weren't black people working and making the majority of our industries run, and it took them the longest to vote. So the argument that being able to work and be part of a war effort means that you have the right to vote is wrong and dumb. If I could remember the history teacher's names, I would call him out. Think about how ridiculous the original statement was then, with all these ridiculous statements I'm buzzing through. If soldiers gave us our rights, like, well, you know, soldiers and police are the people beating protesters, hitting them with gas, hitting them with water hoses. Police officer clubbing a protester, being like, I wonder if that police officer has it framed, and on his wall is like, this is me helping out with civil rights. I was there helping the civil rights movement. Clubbing a black woman. Yeah, but that's what we do because we gave them that rights. This was one step forward. When they tried to desegregate the schools in the South, they should have done it in the North too. Like when they tried to desegregate the schools in the South, the governor felt the pressure from white citizens in his state. So he called in the National Guard to keep the students from school. But the president felt pressure from the nation saying that this is wrong, and the president called in the National Guard to the school to make it so the kids could go there. You see how the soldiers were just a tool? It could very well have been the same National Guard. It could be the same soldiers. They were just given different orders, but they had zero say on either side of it. Soldiers don't give you things. It's you, protesters, fighting, that gives you your rights. So you have all your own rights, and it is the government and it is the ones in power that are able to negotiate and interpret those rights in ways that function in a society. So a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old have all the rights of a 24-year-old, but while they were minors, their children, their parents are the ones that decide what their rights mean and how to use them, because we've decided that they're not mature enough yet in order to express their rights. But that doesn't go for all of their rights, because every child has a right to life. And while a child is a teenager, a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, the parents can't decide that they don't have that. So when I say soldiers are just a tool and good for killing things, that isn't a slight about them. That's why we have soldiers. That's like what they're there for, to be a threat, to kill people. You know, we don't have defense force. We have a threat of death to other people. Talk about some more current issues. Yeah. So the most recent obstruction of rights, I say there's a bunch, but let's talk. We could talk about so many. Well, how many do we have written down here? So there's a lot that I could talk about for like minor minutia for recent rights development. Like FDR had his thing where he had a second Bill of Rights where he recognized people's right to have a job. Misnomenclature of taking the right to work and warping that into a thing so that workers have less bargaining power. There's our right to privacy that's being violated by corporation and the government doesn't understand what it means. Also the right of privacy that's been taken away from us because of the Patriot Act. Of course, we believe that citizens have a right to control their governments or have a say in where they live. What about all the foreigners of countries that we invade? Oh man, there's copyright, which everyone on YouTube has a minor in copyright. So let's wrap this one up by talking about immigrants and trans people. So likely, if you're conservative, in the last couple of years you found out that trans people existed. And now you need to find ways to beat the shit out of them and to deny them their rights because you think they're icky. I'm being really accusatory, I know. So there's bathroom bills and then there's policy not to pay for trans people's medical needs. On one side, I recognize that some women really buy into misogyny and really buy into the patriarchy that we have and think that all men are predators and want to them. And of course, anyone who's biologically male will want to go into the bathroom and watch them poop or them. Like, you see where a disconnect is, right? Like, they haven't existed in the last 3 years. They've existed forever. You didn't hear about their stories because they couldn't tell their stories before. Or they were called something else before. But trans people have always existed. Always. You're gonna ask me for proof, I'm gonna call you a sea lion and then delete your comment. Or just delete your comment. I don't care. You're welcome to go prove a negative. Do it. Like, the argument was that stuff for trans people is too expensive and they didn't want to pay for it anymore. But that's for the military. Like, the Pentagon thinks $400,000 is a rounding error. Their budgets are so big. If every single soldier in our military transitioned to the opposite gender, it still would not be the most expensive thing our military does. It probably wouldn't even increase the budget. Actually, they just increased the military budget again, so they probably have more than enough money to pay for everyone just to be another gender. Be their actual gender. I don't see a lot to do with, like, the bathroom bill either, because like, worst case scenario, there's not going to be public bathrooms anymore by people. Like, this is confusing. There's police. There's male police walking into a woman's restroom. There's cameras in there. Women are trying to pee. And now we're here harassing a girl that looks a little tomboyish because some bigot thinks she doesn't look like a woman. Like, this can only be bad. Like, get ready to no longer have public restrooms. Like, do we have to add that to the Bill of Rights? We have the right to our bodily functions. Like, the right to free speech, liberty, happiness. One of those has got to cover going to a room and peeing in a box. And immigration is a whole nother set of bopsticks. Like, we have the President of the United States saying that we need to skip due process and just kick people out of our country. We have ICE agents acting on their own, being as racist as possible. If someone can't prove that they're American, there on the spot they get kicked out. Like, there's a lot of people. I don't carry around proof that I'm a citizen. I have a driver's license. That doesn't mean I'm a citizen. I don't carry around my birth certificate. But also, my color of skin is not the kind that makes someone demand that. They're also closing ports of entry, so people can't legally come to the country. They can't legally come to a port because you've closed so many of them. And when they show up to a former port of entry, you will arrest them and separate them from their children. And we're closing off paths to citizenship, so people that have lived here for decades. Remember when I was talking about earlier how you have the right to have a say in the government? They're trying to take away the right from being citizens. They're trying to take away the path to citizenship, so they won't be able to vote in the country where they live and should have a say in their government. The police and soldiers are not helping out people with these rights. They are in the way of the people with these rights because the people in power are laying an egg. It's no slight against soldiers. Soldiers are a tool made to kill things, trained to kill things. And of course, it's not that bad because a soldier isn't a soldier like forever. When you get out of the military, you can go on to being an engineer or work at or run a garden or deliver babies or be a doctor. The military is a fantastic tool for a lot of people to get out of poverty because the military gets it so you can have cheaper car insurance, cheaper insurance. There are several stores that give discounts to soldiers, and they pay you for the military. It's a pretty sweet job for, the risks. Maybe you have to weigh out the risks. I didn't think it was a sweet job, but then again, I'm not that disadvantaged. I don't hate the military. It's done a lot of good stuff for a lot of people, especially people that may be disadvantaged or like kicked out of their home or even homeless as a teenager, or I don't know, trans, and people didn't recognize their gender, so they need a way to get a foothold in society, so they sign up to be a soldier. The military is a tool, and it can do good things. We had a revolution. We became a country. We defeated the Nazis, and I would rather have the military with me than against me. But the military is with whoever is in power. They do not generate our rights. But when it comes to protecting our rights and expanding them, I would like to have them on my side. Hell, protesting would be a lot easier if it was those cops holding picket signs instead of standing by and, letting white supremacists walk around. Things are definitely easier when soldiers speak up for things they believe in, like kneeling at football games, and how we convinced you that you should kneel instead of not sit, so you're still respecting soldiers. That shut up a lot of people. They might have forgotten that they shut up and might have kept going, but that did a lot. But that's not where rights come from. That's not who gives us rights. If our country gets invaded, I don't want to not have a military. Also, our country mostly isn't invaded because we're a really hard country to invade. So that's what your rights are and where they came from and how to keep them. protesting. Protesting the ones in power, writing your senator, writing your congressman, showing up and demonstrating. Rod Bloom, the shiftless guy I mentioned before, I went to a couple protests of Rod Bloom and of what he did for the healthcare rally. They met every Tuesday. Tuesday morning, they met in a little park, and they walked a block to his office, and they told his staff their grievances every Tuesday. And I went a couple times, and it was exceedingly boring. Like, protests are naturally like dangerous things because there's police, and there's yelling, and there's blocking traffic. But this protest didn't even block traffic. The park shared a block with his office. And Rod Bloom, the coward, garbage, piece of crap representative that we have, closed his office in our town because of the pathetic protest that we had. He couldn't even stand minor criticism. And his staff does everything they can to insulate himself from all of the mounds of criticism from his people. Garbage like that lets Rod Bloom and Steve King think they're serving the people. And they say, I was voted in on because of these things, and they're what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to listen to you. No, we need to yell at them until they bend. When they try to dodge a question, the next person who asks a question needs to repeat that question until it is answered. They need to answer for what they do, and they need to be publicly pressured, because that's how progress gets made. Two more examples. Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. When Richard Nixon was in office, he enacted the biggest expansion of Medicaid in decades. And he was a Republican. It wasn't because he was a traitor or because he believed in. It's because of public pressure. Ronald Reagan was in the administration over the AIDS epidemic. Ronald Reagan made an outbreak of a disease into an epidemic. The deaths of so many Americans is on his shoulders. But it was pressure from the same community, the one that was ravaged, that stood up for straight and gay people with AIDS, that quilted blankets, that marched, that got arrested, that got maced, that got hit by policemen and soldiers, until the government finally did something to support AIDS research and to help AIDS disease so that we wouldn't have thousands of people dying. Thousands of people died, and Ronald Reagan is a rat for it. Those deaths are on his hands. That piece of trash is lucky he died of cancer before he could really feel the full force of the repercussions for his treasonous and terrible actions. And it is a shame that Republicans look back on him fondly. But it is because of the protests, because of people hearing those protests and hearing the pain of a group of individuals that were hurting, whose rights were hurting. Health care is a right. Health care is a right. We have that chant. We have that chant. And they won. At a great cost. It would have gone smoother if soldiers would have helped. It would have gone sooner if someone said these are just a bunch of people with blankets crying about how we're not giving them medicine. But they didn't. And they don't. Because our rights don't come from them. Our rights come from the ones holding the quilts. Thanks for watching. This is something that I'm very concerned about and is historically very concerning. Like isn't a strong word, so if I've met that very low threshold of, tolerating or making you laugh a little or making you think, hit that like button. It helps my video. I like it. You like it. Like, not a strong word. Please leave a comment if I got any quotes wrong, because I feel like there were a bunch of typos in that last one.
but try to add it onto a real comment and not just put an annoying correction in there, because if you just put like 1 or 2 words and a little asterisk, I have no idea what you're talking about. Come check out my Patreon. Follow my Patreon, even if you don't have money to give me right now. Go there and follow it. I have lots of fun updates, and there will be fun stuff to do. I'm thinking of lowering the threshold for credits to $5. Big thank you to Troubleshooter, my first $5 patron. Okay.
And